Hello, welcome to another TypeScript video. In this video, we are going to take a look at promise in TypeScript. What is promise? According to Wikipedia, promise is a commitment by someone to do or not to do something. What it means in the context of TypeScript. If a function returns a promise, it means that the real result of the function call is not available yet, and we can access the real result when it is available using the promise written by the function. A promise can be in one of three states. The first state is called pending. When the promise is created, it will be in pending state, and when it is resolved successfully, it will move to fulfilled state. If there is any error, then the promise will move to the rejected state. So that's the third state. Now let's look at an example for promise. I'm in VS Code here. I have imported a package called isomorphic fetch. If you want to follow along, you can install isomorphic fetch using npm like this. Once you have installed and imported isomorphic fetch, you will have access to a function called fetch. And the first parameter of this function is going to be the resource that we want to access. In this case, I want to access the home page of Google like this, and by default it is going to issue GET request, and that is what I want to do. So I'm not going to specify any other parameters. So this fetch function actually returns a promise that you can see here in the tooltip. It returns a promise of response. Here the response is the real result of this function call. Because the result is not available yet, it returns promise of response. Yes, promise is actually a generic type, and the type parameter for the promise in this case is response. And if you look at the IntelliSense here, we have access to three methods. We have then, catch, and finally. So then takes a callback function as a parameter, and that callback function will be called when the promise is resolved successfully. On the other hand, catch will take a callback function, and that callback function will be called when the promise is rejected. The third one, finally, will also take a callback function as a parameter, and that callback function will be called always, regardless of whether it was fulfilled successfully or rejected. So let's look at an example for then method first. So I'm going to call this then method with a parameter which is a callback function. And the first parameter of this callback function is going to be response. And in here, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to say console.log response.status. So this is basically going to print the HTTP status of the request I have made. So if I run this, you can see here 200 being printed. So if I replace this with catch method will also take a callback function as a parameter, and the first parameter of that callback function is going to be reason as opposed to response. And in here I'm just going to say console.log error, and then I'm going to print the actual reason. So if I run this, we won't see anything on the response. This is because the fetch function returns a promise, and that promise is resolving successfully. The catch method's callback will only be called if the promise is rejected. So let's change the URL to be something which doesn't exist, in this case HTTP. So if I run this now, we'll see an error message. This basically prints the reason for the rejection of the promise. Let's add both then and catch. So if I run this, I'll still get the error, only the error, because the then callback will be called only when the promise is resolved successfully. So if I change this back to a normal URL, and if I run this, we'll only get the message from the then callback, not from the catch callback, because the promise is resolved successfully in this case. If we add finally to this, each of these methods returns a promise, so we can chain these calls. So finally takes a callback, and that callback doesn't take any parameter, and within this callback I'm just going to say end, like this. If I run this, in this case my promise has resolved successfully, and after that the message from finally callback is printed. If I change this to a URL that doesn't exist, like this, then we'll get the error message, and we'll also get the message from the finally callback. That is it for now. I hope this video is useful. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.